Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larsen. On this episode, I'm really excited to have Sarah Dusek. She is a very accomplished woman, from nonprofit to entrepreneurship to investment fund manager, and I'm excited to go over this story. Sarah, thanks for making time to join the show.
My pleasure. It's great to be here.
So let's jump around a little bit. I've been interested to hear, from becoming a lawyer, growing up in the UK, to nonprofit, countering AIDS and working in Africa, and then feeling a little frustrated that kind of feel like you're putting Band-Aids on things and not really like actually changing the world like you'd intended. And all of a sudden realizing that, the dark side of business might actually have some value. And coming over here to the States with your husband and starting Under Canvas, which is, a very well-known business in the glamping space, won so many awards from Condé Nast and all these people, and excited to talk a lot about that today. But these days, I am fascinated with what you're doing with venture capital, especially with women in Africa. Can you talk about this?
Yeah, well, maybe the starting point should be that changing the world is actually hard. So I was disillusioned in my 20s after 8 years of working for NGOs in the nonprofit world, and came over, as you said, to the business world, to the dark side, as I called it then, with this idea that business actually was an amazing tool for driving good and driving change. And now I've been in business for almost 20, more than 20 years, so a long time. And it's still easy to get frustrated and disillusioned with how hard it is to keep moving the world forward and keep driving change. So maybe I'll start there. But that really was the impetus for creating our own venture capital fund. We sold the majority of Under Canvas in 2018, so almost 5 years ago. And on the back of founding a company and growing and scaling it, I realized it's really hard for women to get funded. Still, only 2% of female founders are getting funded annually. And I realized, gosh, I had learned a thing or two, which I didn't know before, about growing and scaling a company, and that actually maybe there would be some value for helping other women go on that same journey and helping women build businesses that could help keep moving the world forward. So that was the impetus for creating a fund, investing in women, and getting involved down in Africa.
Well, I'm excited for that whole movement. I raised my 4 children as much as I could to consider entrepreneurship maybe over jobs, and I feel like I've generally brought them over to the dark side. And
well done. I was going to say, did you succeed? Is anyone tempted?
Well, we'll see. My kids are 19 to 4, 2 boys, 19 to 12, 2 boys, 2 girls, and but no, both daughters are planning on entrepreneurship, and so it's nice to know there'll be more people out there funding that side of things.
Championing their cause, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm interested, when you look at this opportunity, we had a absolutely great interview a couple of months back with a gentleman who's been up in Kenya funding for, I want to say 11 years now, and stayed through the Civil War, and had just been through some ups and downs. American guy, and just has had so much fun, but also had like some really great returns.
Yes.
Of just being on the ground, being really in touch with what's going on, and being a part of the community, and just kind of like being the beneficiary of some rapid growth in Africa. Can you talk about kind of your focus there?
Yeah, my experience is very similar. I mean, the exciting thing about being involved with Africa at this point in time is we're kind of at the very beginning of the tech era. So just like, 50 years or so ago, when, the tech bubble was starting to form and venture capital was beginning to become a thing, that's where we're at right now. So we're about 10 years in, probably, to sort of the startup space and venture capital, being a thing on the continent. So still relatively early, but tech is starting to boom. So the fascinating thing about, digitization on the continent, we're really starting to see the acceleration of digital services. And you've got 1 billion people who all have phones, who are all digitally connected, may not have laptops, obviously, but are even the lowest socioeconomic bracket of folks have phones and are running their lives on phones. So it's a really interesting time to be involved in the development of the continent, and seeing tech as an opportunity to speed up development and speed up progress of development on the continent. And of course, that creates enormous opportunities, as we're trying to drive growth, for driving financial return also.
And how big is the fund?
So we've just deployed our first. We're 3 years in, and we did 10 million over the last 3 years, and we're now actively raising our second fund, and hopefully we'll be able to do a larger fund too.
That's fun. And then did you guys disclose numbers on the Under Canvas transaction evaluation?
We did not, no.
Okay.
But the company is a whole lot more valuable today than when I sold it.
So when you think about fintech, I've heard you talk about what an opportunity fintech is in Africa. On the show, we've been lucky enough to have a number of really great fintech founders. But for people who don't understand why it's of the opportunities in Africa, it's one of the top ones. Can you explain kind of the special situation there?
Yeah, fintech's very exciting. And if it's possible to go back in your own mind when you think about how little we are using cash in America today, and how little we even have to get a card out now, and you can use your phone. You can do enormous amounts just from your phone with your own banking. None of that had happened in Africa. Cash was still the predominant form of payment. A lot of people don't even necessarily have bank accounts in Africa. And there's a whole sort of segment of society that is deemed to be unbanked, which typically means they're informally trading. They're not necessarily, money is not necessarily running through bank accounts or from fixed sources. So there's a massive opportunity to create digital solutions to help people leapfrog effectively and create digital solutions for very real everyday needs of everyday folks. That may be creating wallets. It might be creating payment solutions. It might be remittances from across borders. It might be savings and loans products for a particular demographic of people. And so fintech is exceptionally hot from a venture capital perspective. But I think just looking at 1 billion people who have either, many of whom have not had access to banking services or have not been part of a traditional banking world, there's an enormous opportunity to move folks forward. And there's enormous opportunity to create solutions for individualized sort of solutions for people groups that haven't existed before. And so that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of different banking type products coming to market.
With an audience of 1 billion people, no wonder people get excited, right?
Yes, exactly. I mean, large markets make venture capitalists very excited. Untapped markets make venture capitalists very excited. And seeing sort of unique solutions to unique problems also makes venture capitalists very excited. So the combination of those three things is definitely a win.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to dive into your entrepreneurial experience. So can you talk about this idea of you and your husband come over to the States, you come to Montana, which I love. I grew up just north of Montana in Alberta. And you see like these beautiful open places and think, wow, this is almost like remind you in some ways of the beautiful open places in Africa, and thought, what if we brought the safari experience here?
Yes, that's right.
Go ahead.
I was going to say my initial career started in Africa a long time ago. And when I married my husband, that was sort of the genesis, really. I arrived in Montana, and there was so much about arriving in Montana, and big open spaces and prairies and enormous amounts of wildlife and huge skies that reminded me of when I first moved to Africa in my early 20s. So that was the genesis of an idea, along with struggling and questioning and thinking about how could we be involved with seeing business become a vehicle for doing good, we've kind of figured, well, we've got no idea about running a business and no idea about being in business. So we ought to try and figure it out. If we believe that and we think it's a vehicle for moving the world forward, we ought to learn. So we ought to go into business. So that was the idea. Could we recreate the safari experience in Montana, on the Montana prairie initially?
Well, I know that there was all the exciting bumps that all startups go through, but ultimately highly successful. Can you talk about some of the awards that you've won and some of the recognition that Under Canvas has achieved?
Yeah, Under Canvas has been very privileged to be on the Travel and Leisure best awards every year. Travel and Leisure and Condé Nast run those best in the world categories, and Under Canvas regularly finds itself on those lists. I think in the early days, I was particularly proud of Sunset Magazine in California picked up on us early in our life cycle. And I'm always particularly proud of those early moments. So before a brand is really a well-known brand and nobody's really talking about you, you're hopeful that someone will pay attention, or someone will notice you. And Sunset Magazine actually really helped put us on the map. And so our early awards through Sunset Magazine were particularly meaningful for me.
I bet. So, with glamping becoming such a thing now, and obviously many, many folks not operating at your level, what do you see as some of the biggest mistakes people are making in the glamping industry, specifically in the US or Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I think people have always thought that glamping looks really easy. So how hard can it be, right, to throw tents up in a field? How difficult is that? Surely that can't be very difficult. But the challenges actually of the business are why there are still very few purely glamping, tented glamping brands in the country. It's actually exceptionally difficult to pull off. So, most businesses, plan for, in their risk scenarios, you might have 3 or 4 things that you have to contend with. Under Canvas, being an outside product, has an enormous number of risk factors as a business that it has to manage. We've seen catastrophic wildfires and smoke denigrate being in the outdoors for many, many, many years in a row. You have then the fire, flash, flood, wind, torrential weather. Tents have to withstand an enormous amount of problematic weather. And then there are the challenges of a consumer. Anytime you're dealing with a consumer, keeping customers happy is challenging. And for an outside product that is affected by weather and wind, that can be very difficult. So, and doing something at scale is always hard because you have to be consistent. You have to deliver the same product with the same service over and over and over and over again. And actually delivering a consistent, well-produced product or service is actually very, very hard to do. And it might seem easy, but it should look easy when it's done really well. That's when you're doing your job, when it looks easy from the outside. But it's actually quite hard to pull off. And all Under Canvas camps are seasonal, which means they're not open year round. So we do an enormous amount of hiring and training every year. And we're very proud of the retention of our people year over year, which for a seasonal employer is exceptionally high. I think for the last few years, we've been at over 50%, which is amazing. So I think what I see is people often think this is a lifestyle business and often think this is a nice thing to do, and actually then realize just how hard it is, what the hours look like, because it's a 24/7, 7 days a week kind of job. And it's pretty tough to keep pulling off day after day after day, and keeping people happy and well looked after.
Well, I want to talk about a few things there. What do you attribute your high retention rate, this 50% plus, repeat workers season after season?
I think culture. the company I built, we built because we wanted to create access to the outdoors, and largely trying to be a bridge for my husband and I to enjoy the outdoors, for our family to enjoy the outdoors. And we realized, what we were doing was creating a life for ourselves, but we also wanted to create a life for our employees. So we always talked about and wanted coming to work under Canvas being like, this is an extension of your life. This is not work and then I go play. This is, I do this work because I love it, and I love being in the outdoors every day, and I love going off after work for a hike, and then for a barbecue, and then maybe at the weekend or my day off I might go do some crazy adventure. And so we realized our people were people who love the outdoors, and they love to adventure, and they love to travel, and they love to do new things. And we realized we were creating a lifestyle, not just for our guests, but for our team members too. And I think that's why people stay with us for a long time. I mean, people have complained about millennials and now Gen Z for like forever and ever and ever. And our company was built by millennials, for millennials, and who have worked at Under Canvas for over a decade now. And so that, I think, is part of who we are, and I think that is our culture. And it's easy to say culture eats strategy for breakfast, but I think it's true. I think culture and lifestyle is becoming increasingly important. And I think for all employers, not just for outdoor employers, but people care about how they live, and work is a huge percentage of how we spend our time. And so if your work doesn't connect with how you want to live your life and what's meaningful and important to you, you're going to have disconnected and unhappy employees. And as we all know, that's expensive, and that's difficult for growing and scaling your business.
Yeah. When you think about the similarities and differences of your staff running a seasonal outdoor business versus maybe traditional hospitality staff, what are those similarities and differences?
Well, we've got no walls. So that's a pretty major difference. Our staff spend 95% of their time outside. So that's a huge difference for the average hotel worker who, may be inside or sitting at a desk most of the time. We clean rooms, but you still have to do that outside under Canvas. So other than, we welcome guests and we look after guests. Those are the main similarities. There are so many differences. It's a hospitality experience, but it's so much more than a hospitality experience. We think of it as a life, as a way of life, and an opportunity to do and help other people experience things that they love. And I think that's different than just staying in a hotel. This is more about having an experience in the outdoors. So we think of ourselves as an experience company rather than a hospitality company.
And thinking about yourself that way, what's something you do different as a result of it?
I think everything revolves around not just being a nice place to sleep. Everything is revolved around having an adventure in wilderness. And so that might be, orchestrating s'mores around a campfire in the evening. It might be sitting back and listening to live music. It might be going to a yoga class. It might be planning an adventure in the national park the next day and going on a tour or going whitewater rafting. So I think it's more holistic. I think it's, and for us, it's always also been about helping our guests connect with wilderness and connect with their environment so that they care about it. And that was really the heart of our vision initially, was can we also not create access to the outdoors, but can we help people care about the outdoors? And can we help, preserve and protect our resources and our environment? And so Under Canvas is exceptionally proud that we still use about 10% of the water that a same size hotel would use. We almost all of our hotels are using some form of either completely or in part alternative energy source. And so our footprint, we designed the camps to be able to leave no trace effectively, so that if we ever disappeared or stopped doing business, that the landscape could look almost exactly like it had before we got there in the first place. So a seeming sort of integration and an education for guests, and hopefully a falling in love with the wilderness is what we're shooting for.
So that's a really interesting number, using 10% of the water. What does that look like? How is that possible?
Yeah, it's crazy, really. Orchestrated because of my crazy husband. When we first built our first camps, we had very little water. One of our first camps was in the desert in Moab. Another of our first camps, we were having to bring water in. So that necessitated having to use small amounts of water. So in each tent, there are low flow toilets. So they use less water than a regular toilet. There are the faucet fixtures do not stay on for any length of time. So you can't wash your hands for 15 minutes under the tap. You will press a button and the water will run for a few minutes and then it will stop. And the same with the showers. The showers all have pull chains, so that you have to pull a chain for the water to run. And if you let go of it, it will stop. So it just means, it doesn't allow for a 20-minute shower, and initially, many people said, as a hospitality experience, that's terrible, because you're not giving people these long, luscious, amazing, water experiences. But actually, when we communicated to guests that these are our intentional inconveniences, we are intentionally inconveniencing you for the sake of the planet, actually, everybody thought it was wonderful and really bought in on it. And yes, it's slightly inconvenient to have to pull a shower to have, water come down on you. But actually, it's perfectly fine. And the water's still hot, and you can still lather your hair, and you can still take a great shower, and you get to do that in the outdoors. So it's actually a pretty magical, unique experience. And I think one of the things that makes the experience different than being in a regular hotel, or even just going camping by yourself, it's quite novel and quite fun. So amazingly, I think it's become one of those things that really endears guests to our brand rather than putting them off.
Okay, so you're a venture capitalist. Can I pitch you the idea I was telling my wife about this week?
You can try.
So I was thinking, as we're looking at doing Airbnb resorts, ours are much more for the snowboard, skateboard, surfing community. And we want to do tree houses, and we just had some big 28-foot teepees sewn by a Native American guy in California and stuff, and some tiny house cabins. But I thought, the Japanese onsens where you go take a shower and then you get in the hot tubs, right? I thought, what if somebody could take a short shower, and then go to another unit that recycles the water from a solar powered water recycler. So you could take a long shower, but it's recycling your own water. But because you showered off before you got in it. So anyways, that was my thought.
We were working for the longest time. We were working on fully recyclable water units that would actually filter the water out and then recycle it back into the system. So reuse water over and over and over and over and over again. And that technology exists. Just regulation in California in particular, but most states are not allowing that technology to be legal yet. So, but it's possible. So, which is, I think, is amazing, because it also, it can take water out of the toilet even.
Wow.
Which I know sounds gross, but it filters it completely. It doesn't take, I think it can take black water too, not just grey water, and completely filter it and completely clean it so that you could reuse it.
Wow, that's incredible.
I know.
Because we keep thinking about really quite remote off-grid locations for backcountry snowboarding units and stuff like this. So I gotta look into that. I think another thing would love to get your insight on is this idea of, even if you're retaining 50% plus of your staff, that means 30-40% of your staff are new this year, and you need to put the tents up, essentially build a whole resort to run it for the season, and train them all. What's a best practice? What's a tip you have, having done that now for so many years?
Having really robust training procedures and great managers. I mean, managers really are everything. So we've always worked really, really hard to try and retain our managers, because the managers are the frontline folks for training people and working with them on an ongoing basis. So retention of managers has always been key for us, and many of our managerial positions are year round for that very reason. Even when they don't have to work for 3 or 4 or 5 months of the year, that became important to us. And I think ensuring that you're continuing to communicate company culture for fit and hiring for fit becomes really, really important. So our team's got really, really good at being able to spot someone who was an under-canvas person, because we had very, very clear, defined understandings of what an under-canvas rock star looked like, which, was down to behaviors, preferences, all sorts of value-based judgments based on this would make someone a fit and this would make someone not a fit. So that helps too, is trying to, make sure that everyone hires rock stars, because that matters when you've got a short season and a short period of time to train people, and people have to be up and running pretty quick.
When you think about that hiring process, and kind of like the difference between people who interview well versus people who really will perform well, do you have any tips on trying to sort those two out?
I was talking to someone else about this today, and it was this whole topic of authenticity. Is how do you determine? Can you determine effectively in an interview process someone's authenticity? And I think that's quite hard. A couple of different people interviewing is helpful. And certainly with what we're seeing with our startup companies that we're investing in now, is we've been advocating for people to submit videos initially of themselves, where they answer 4 or 5 different questions that multiple people then view, and they have to get through that process to then actually get a real interview with a real person. And I think trying to see people in lots of different environments, or having lots of people's eyes on them, even if it's just for a short period, because you can make a quick judgment call pretty instantly from hearing someone for 4 or 5 minutes. But then digging in and, having more in-depth time with them, and asking pertinent questions, asking questions that are really hard to be inauthentic over. You want to get into people's values and what people care about and what matters to them, and, without asking too much personal stuff, but trying to align on what do you care about. And, as I said, usually it's been pretty quick for us for figuring out this person's not a fit. But that depends on having a very clear set of values and a very clear set of who are our people. Because when you know who your people are, it's really easy to look for them and to spot someone who isn't. It's much harder to not spot them if you don't necessarily have clear ideas about who your people are.
Yeah. And what about recruiting? Such tight labor markets these days, and inflation, wage inflation. When you think about seasonal workers, and all of a sudden, price, salary expectations are gone up, also all sorts of things like that. How do you think about navigating that?
Well, it's tough, and luckily for us, or unluckily for us, we've always been in tight job markets. So we've always been in resort towns where there's usually a lack of people wanting to work, and it's always been a tough labor market for seasonal work in resort kind of towns. So the things that we have always relied on, as I said earlier, are looking for people who are looking for our lifestyle and creating a lifestyle type work. We always have provided free housing, well, other than our early years when we had still provided housing but was paid for. But in the last 7 years, the housing has been free. And so really pay has been about being consummate with local, we have to be competitive, and we have to be thoughtful about increases and keeping up with where the market is. But over and above that, I mean, when that's all you've got to play with, then it's just a bidding war, right? That's when it becomes important to be an employer of choice. And things like housing have been important for us, things like lifestyle, opportunities for growth, being able to grow with a company and move up and, take travel, all those kind of things have been super important for us, and they will continue to be super important.
I grew up about an hour and a half from the Canadian side of Glacier National Park called Waterton. And they're very good at, getting people just to come out for the summer because they have housing and a lot of those, right? Is that a model that you guys have done a lot, or are you mostly pulling from the resort towns?
No, mostly we're not pulling from resort towns. Almost all of our employees would probably be from somewhere else, for a season. And the under canvas benefits because it can then move people around. So you've done one season with us in Glacier, you can go do a season in Moab, or then you can go do a season in Zion, and then you can go explore somewhere else. So as long as we keep growing, the possibilities are infinite for going someplace else with the company and doing the same job or doing a slightly different job, but different setting. And that's appealing, I think, to people too.
Yeah. You've mentioned Utah a couple of times. I'm definitely a fan. I grew up as a kid coming down from Canada, seeing cousins and stuff, and we've been here over 10 years now, and I think I might be here for good. I love it. What have you enjoyed about doing business in Utah?
Oh, Utah's an amazing state. We have probably our highest density of camps are in Utah. I think we've completed the circuit now of all the maybe we've got one left that we haven't got a camp at yet, but we've got lots of camps in Utah. Utah's just so extraordinary because it's got such extraordinary diverse landscapes. And, you've got ski resorts in Park City, and then you've got phenomenal rock features and recreational opportunities. So the recreational opportunities in Utah as a state are, I think, probably second to none. They're pretty amazing. And you've got great seasons. You've got winter activities, and you've got summer and spring and fall activities. So it makes it a great all-rounder. We love it. We love Utah.
Me too. When you think about this idea of being near the national parks, what do you see as some of the big mistakes people are making when they're trying to do that?
In terms of glamping companies?
Yeah. Other glamping companies, they're like, oh, this will be, back to your point, this will be easy. We'll just do some tents by the national park. What are they, specifically the national park connection and the maybe underestimating some of the issues or complications of being in the middle of nowhere sometimes, or anything? Just in general, what do you think people underestimate about doing business right by a national park?
Well, I think doing business in the middle of nowhere is pretty tough. So, everything's tough from, basic infrastructure is tough to staffing is tough. And, as we've been talking about staffing, and as I said, we've had to recruit in all our staff typically and house them. And I think people often think, oh, we'll just hire people and they'll live in their homes. But in resort towns or, outside national parks, there's no housing. There is nowhere to live, certainly nowhere affordable to live. So that's problematic. Access can be problematic. The national parks are increasingly going to a reservation system model, and that's changing the dynamic of visitors and how people visit the parks, and what's possible. So that's fluid, which is obviously out of your control as a provider. But those are probably the big challenges. I think people. I still have a home in Montana and live in a small resort town, and many businesses close in the summer when it's the peak season. because they don't have workers. And that's, pretty devastating for a small business. So, we've got to figure out solutions to that. And, for small organizations, those options are pretty darn challenging.
Yeah, no kidding. When you think about the future of glamping as the industry is maturing and maybe even a little wider than just glamping, but this like outdoor off-grid, let's be an experience company more than just a bed to sleep in. What do you see in the next decade or the next 5 years?
My hope for this industry, with really being the pioneer of it in the US, my hope has always been that we would lead and influence on environmental issues, so that as we would continue to create new experiences for people in the outdoors, that we would take a leading role in shaping consumer behavior, with driving regulatory change, with changing expectations for regular hospitality organizations, just because consumer expectations has now changed and shifted, and to lead. And I think there is an enormous opportunity to lead in this space in a way that means that things that we thought were okay 5 years ago are no longer okay. And that actually, we become the norm rather than the unusual and the exceptional, or this becomes mainstream, and that most people feel like this would be part of their life and their expectation that they would be able to be out in the outdoors. And I think glamping, the eco resort space, or experiential space, is about creating accessibility for all types of people, not just for the hardcore outdoor nuts that have always loved it and will backpack and do whatever it takes. But how can we keep creating access for people who would not think this was possible or would not be open? Or how do we just keep enlarging this space? Because I genuinely believe being in the outdoors is good for us. It's good for us. It's good for the planet. And I think the planet needs us and we need the planet. And so I think we got to keep leading in this space.
Yeah. Well, I want to switch to more the finance side of things. There's not a lot of people that realize, I saw a report last year from the Outdoor Association that of the 800 billion a year Americans spend on outdoors and action sports, 700 billion of it is travel related. But when I think about investors, finance people specifically in real estate, and I hear them list off the categories, and they say, commercial, residential, senior living, things like this. I don't hear outdoor, even though it is such a big space. Can you talk about just the struggles to get the initial funding? And then, let's start there.
Yeah, it's always been a struggle, largely because this type of real estate, real estate that Andy Canvas might use, or another glamping company might use, or you might, want to use, generally doesn't have a lot of alternative uses. And the whole real estate industry has been built upon a premise that a piece of property has value because of its possible uses. And the type of real estate that we are generally utilizing doesn't have a lot of alternatives other than recreation. And so it has been a hard shift, I think, for folks to start thinking about this type of land as a real estate asset, which is, I think, still unfortunate and still a shame, just because of the enormous amount of value that can be created from recreational use. So I think we're lagging behind in that regard, and also lagging behind because we aren't fully wrapping our brains around or fast enough creating a robust industry around preservation. So, of course, we've had conservation easements for a long time that effectively been tax write-offs for, effectively that's how they've been thought of. But we haven't started thinking practically or fast enough around biodiversity credits or carbon credits or preservation credits for making sure that certain amounts of land remain wilderness or remain untouched. And certainly, we all know our national parks and our state parks are woefully underfunded. And so I don't believe we can rely on the government to continue. I mean, we're struggling to preserve what we've got with national parks, for example, manage them. So it would be incredible to see a real estate industry, as you say, start to recognize there's value to be created from preservation. There's value to be created out of recreation, and that actually we just haven't got creative enough yet with rethinking what value looks like. And I think that's because there's been no need for innovation because the market's still so huge and still enormous, and it takes entrepreneurs to help investment bankers think differently than they normally do. So that's why I think it's great that entrepreneurs become investors themselves and start to try and sort of pioneer some of these new ways of thinking about financing and new ways of pioneering other models. We're certainly interested in the moment at looking at natural capital and biodiversity credits, which are not yet a thing, which I'm thinking will be a thing. And starting to see that become more mainstream will be pretty exciting.
We've been working with a log home builder that started getting into forestry and sourcing their own lumber, and just did it in a much higher quality way, to the point where they were winning awards from the U.S. Forestry Service. And when other places were getting sanctioned by the Forestry Service, they were sending them out, hey, come get trained by these guys and the way they approach it. And they're working on a property, 28,000 acres, and they have really been looking into biochar gasification. And it ends up that rotting trees produce more CO2 than all the cars on Earth put together. And so from a carbon credit standpoint, they've been looking at the big units coming out of Europe. And so you can sell it, for fertilizer and for pharmaceuticals, and it has all these benefits, right? But the carbon credits are actually worth more than the biochar. And so what got started is like this big 28,000, we're going to do the log homes here, which they would log from their own property, and they start looking at the biochar opportunity just from the dead wood, because it captures that carbon for 600 or 700 years that would normally get released over the next decade as that tree rots, right? And it's like, as the further they got into the project, it's like the carbon credit started outpacing the hospitality opportunity and the recreation opportunity and the logging opportunity. And it was interesting to see a model change for them.
Yeah. And I think we're going to see more of that. And I'm hoping that the speed of adoption of this kind of stuff will start to happen more quickly. And we're certainly looking at, in South Africa currently, we've got a 10,000 acre project for which we're looking at biodiversity credits because the biodiversity is off the charts. And, the possibility that the land could be worth less than the carbon credits is also mind-numbingly mental. But that's, that I think increasingly we'll start to think about the value of land because of its potential for carbon credits. So there are some big shifts that need to happen in the real estate movement for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, let's talk about from the progress of in the early days, hard to get the money, hard to get going, to the point of obviously having the large exit. Can you talk about what changed over those years and what was going through the mind of the acquirers at the point that maybe didn't exist years earlier when you guys first started in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think I don't want to speak for them, but I think what went through their mind was recognizing a new market, and the opportunity to really be early to the table with creating value from a market that's huge and still had a lot of growth potential, and recognizing there's a lot of growth to be had still. So I think for them it was a no-brainer. what happened from we bootstrapped for a very, very long time. I had an amazing local banker who helped us get a few equipment loans which helped us buy equipment and tents. And the fact that he recognized them as collateral was pretty unheard of. So he was, those kind of small bank relationships can be really, really important, particularly, when folks are able to think a little bit outside of the box and be a bit creative with what they're able to do with their balance sheets. So that was super helpful for us. We had other funding, different pieces of funding were helpful for us because people stayed with us. And that, it's not advice that I can really give, but it was what happened for us in that people saw what we were doing, what we were trying to do and do by ourselves. And they said, oh, maybe there's a way for us to help you. And maybe, we could repurpose this thing that we do over here. And maybe we could fit this in your box temporarily. And, I had lots of crazy loans like that, that were kind of ad hoc mezzanine type stuff that wasn't secured because there was nothing really to secure it against, other than the shares in the company and us guaranteeing it, which definitely I was not good for because I didn't own anything outside of the company. So, it was very evolutionary. It was, trying to constantly fit round pegs in square holes, but all of it, every piece of funding that we managed to navigate was because of relationships and building relationships. And sometimes they came from people who were guests, and sometimes, they were people I'd been connected to through various different sources. But we had to scramble and, scrape together pennies and dollars here and there for a very long time. So it was probably the major reason that we sold when we sold, just because our fundraising journey had been so painful and so difficult. And we lived on a knife edge for such a long time. So it was hard. It's very hard. And I don't actually see it getting any easier, which is not good news. If anything, the debt market's worse, infinitely worse, probably the worst it's been for 20 years. So that's tough. But yeah, and as we said, the recognition of the type of land and the type of asset that we have in this space is also tough. So really what you're left with is convincing equity partners to come on board with you, or do some venture debt and take a gamble on you. And that market's tough too. So it's a tough funding time all around.
Yeah.
But we built a business on the back of being profitable quickly. So that was really what saved us. We had to be profitable. We had to, we couldn't take huge amounts of money because it just wasn't available. Inflated in valuations, couldn't do it. So had to build a business model quickly that was profitable, that would wash its own face, and then juggle some debt in the mix. And that was really how we did it.
Yeah. Magic, that profitability thing. More companies should consider it, huh?
I know, it's such an unusual phenomenon, isn't it? I mean, I was lucky in the sense that because I'd come from the nonprofit world, I really did not have any clue how venture capital worked. So I just didn't understand this. I knew, you make money, you pay expenses, you get what is left at the end of it. And so, because we didn't have anything to back us up, we had to make money. So it certainly sort of proved to be imperative for creating a business model that wasn't burning cash. So I'm still a venture capitalist today, and I'm still of that philosophy. Make money as fast as you possibly can and don't burn cash.
Well, you look at the startup founders who bootstrapped first and their eventual exits, because they had to be profitable. Like the percentage of the business they retained, the likelihood the business continued to exist. If you can survive bootstrapped and then you add money on top, like the chances you continue to succeed, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why investors should always back founders who've bootstrapped for a while, right? Because they invariably know how to generate a profit and invariably know how to manage money, generally don't waste money on anything, and generally more efficient and therefore more profitable. Fact.
Yeah. Well, listen, if people want to connect with you or follow you or find out about the fund, where are the best places, social media wise, website wise?
Yes. I'm active on LinkedIn, so you can always find me on LinkedIn. I'm Sarah Dusek on LinkedIn, or at our website at Enigma Ventures, and any of our social handles for Enigma Ventures, you will also be able to get hold of me. So yeah, we'd love to stay in touch.
That's great. Maybe as we close off, what's one of the best pieces of advice you ever received?
Wow. If I'm answering the question today, and I am, I would say listen to yourself. Be true to yourself, and listen to yourself. And it's very easy to get distracted by lots of either shiny and new, or lots of noise, or lots of conflicting opinions, or negative news, or, yada, 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 yada. And I say at the end of the day, be in tune with yourself, really listen to yourself. It matters that you're authentic. It matters that you're invested in what you're doing. It matters that you are connected with yourself and not disconnected from yourself and others. And if you want to stay in the game a long time and not get burned out or not get burned, in however you want to interpret that, you need to listen to yourself, and then you'll make good decisions and you'll be alive to tell the tale.
Pretty great. Well, thanks for doing this.
My pleasure. It's been fun to be here. Thanks so much.
Okay, bye everyone.